for a good deal to die, it's a product of miscommunication. And, I get 75-year-old sellers who, jump on a call with me and everything's in their head and they can't put anything on paper. Especially when you're dealing with M&A, you're dealing with people and you're dealing with sellers. Communication is like the utmost important thing you're going to be doing in this transaction. Every party needs to feel like they're involved in the process. What buyers do well, the ones that I've seen succeed, is build a relationship with the seller, but always be weary of trust but verify. If I could give one parting advice to buyers is, man, make sure you've got people in your corner, make sure you got a good team. Don't skip out on any steps as much as you might think that you're able to or capable. The best sellers are the ones that they give us access to the QuickBooks and they say, anything you guys want, here's the bank statements, here's QuickBooks, here's my credit cards. They give us everything up front. But I think people are starting to understand, man, you can make so much money in these businesses. I caveat that all by saying it does require a certain personality.
So let's start a little bit with your background. How did you get on the path that you're on?
Yeah, of course. So I kind of went to, pretty traditional path here. I went to SFU, Simon Fraser University out here in Burnaby. Got my CPA. I articled with Deloitte in my third year, I believe it was. And then it was a pretty, they kind of gave you a return offer for when you finish your schooling. So I started my articling there, did my audit background, did my 3 years. It was a pretty traditional path, got to see a lot of things. And, it was, at the time in my career, is probably the best experience I could have had. This was kind of right before COVID had started. And so I was still experiencing that in office kind of camaraderie with articling students and things like that. And then, COVID hit, things changed a little bit, finished off my senior year and I was kind of trying to look at what's next. And our CEO from Treewalk Consulting here, Alex McCauley, I kind of spoke with him first time I met him, we went for a walk. And at the time, the firm had only about 20 people and 21 people. And really, I was inspired by the kind of entrepreneurial mindset that he had with the firm and his background. And I was like, man, I want to be, having done Deloitte and the big stuff, I wanted to be part of something that was growing and smaller. That comes with this negatives as well, right? When you're dealing with smaller companies, less procedures, there's less guarantee of client work, there's more risk involved, but there's more upside and there's more reward with the client work you're doing. And that's kind of really what I wanted to be a part of. And so I joined Alex. We had 21 people at the time, and now he's up to 55, 60. I don't know the exact number, but it's up there, right? And we've grown 3x in the last couple of years. And, I'm happy to say I've been kind of part of that growth with him and, seen myself kind of our Q of E arm, right? I was kind of telling you this before this started. We've done about 27, 28 QVs this year, and ranging from 1 to 60 million in enterprise value. And for our team to do that, I think, it's been pretty incredible. And I think, hopefully next year stays the same and, we kind of keep growing here. But really, and for me, I just want to work with entrepreneurs and people who are doing crazy things in business. I think my clients now have gone to a point where I give them all my personal number and they text me, and I would never get that experience at a big firm or Deloitte, right? They're not going to text me. And so now I wake up in the morning and people are asking me I've got a deal closing on Halloween here, and leading up to it, every few days I'm talking with the buyer, hey, where are you guys at with the share purchase agreement? Where are you guys at with the working cap negotiations? Here's the, working cap exhibit you need to have. Here's the terminology you need to put into your SPA, small things like that. And I'm so excited to see him close and grow. And, even when he buys that business, I'm checking in hey, man, was it what you bought? Are you able to grow revenue? Where are you at with cash flows? Are you making, SBA payments 30, 40 grand a month? Are you able to make those? It's being very involved in the process and being a partner rather than just external advisor.
Yeah. I don't know if we mentioned this when we were at that get together last year, but did you have a chance to take any courses with Jan Simon? I know he's a lecturer at SFU.
I didn't, but I think he has a book you were telling me about potentially, or a podcast he has, and you were telling me about it, but I didn't get a chance to look into it.
Yeah, he's got a great book on search funds and acquisition entrepreneurship, and he's all over the place. But speaking about Vancouver kind of punching above its weight, he's also at SFU as well as a part-time lecturer there. So speaking about due diligence, quality of earnings, etc., why, in your experience, why do good deals die?
Yeah, I think so. For a good deal to die, it's a product of miscommunication, and I think that's part of it. Especially when you're dealing with sellers, like the sellers we deal with. I get 75-year-old sellers who, jump on a call with me and everything's in their head and they can't put anything on paper. Are they lying? I don't know, but can I verify it? Probably not, right? And that's where it gets a little bit of a tricky situation, because I've had chances where I've gone to buyers and I said, look, like, I don't think he's lying, but I can't verify it. So do with that information as you will, right? Like, it's up to you to decide. Like, if I can't verify these invoices, or he's saying he's got cash payments that he's taking in and all we got is bank statements, it's like, do I have 100% comfort on this? No. Do I think he's lying? I don't know. But I mean, if you're personally guaranteeing that loan, is that a risk you want to take? Other than that, it's messy financials always get into the way. um, Working cap, kind of miscommunications early on. Like, we're dealing with one where the seller has got their bookkeeper to prepare a working cap calculation, and this whole time he's had that number in his mind, and it's 1.7 million. And I've taken a look at it, and it's a number that doesn't include, it includes debt and it includes cash. And for a technical accounting bookkeeper, sure, they just taken current assets and they minus current liabilities. But for an M&A transaction, we're doing cash free, debt free. And so our working cap peg is going to be substantially different. The business has a lot of debt on it. And so our numbers are way higher. And so as you go to close, the seller's got in his mind this number that's unrealistic and unachievable. And so those are some of the small reasons, I think, where you could have a good deal in place, but it just can't get across the line because there's certain things that the seller has kind of misconstrued or thought of differently than the buyer. And that's kind of a miscommunication. And I think that's where the good deals, there are a few that slip through the cracks. And it's just, I think, the seller needs like another year or two to prepare, or 6-7 months, hire somebody, pay that money up front. We're doing a few sell side quality of earnings now just because of this. The seller's like, listen, I know I'm going to get asked about these things. Let's get ahead of it. Those deals are a little bit larger, so they've got some room to play, I guess. But they know, like, they're going to make a lot of money on this transaction, that let's get ahead of these things. Let's prepare a sell side quality of earnings report. Let's go through this today, so that in 6 months from now, when a buyer comes with their own QV and they try to push me on these, I can say, no, like, we've done this, we've looked into this, we've vetted this. And then you've got a team on your side to push back or kind of agree with, depending on what they're bringing up. So, yeah, I think there's varying reasons why deals collapse, and then there's the obvious, one or two times where there's sellers are trying to pull a fast one without telling you. Like, we had one where they had a big purchase order. It was a small business, probably 400K or 500K STE, and they had a 300K purchase order that they put into accounts receivable and said that's revenue, 300K. And, I'm like, hey, it's been sitting here for 70, 80 days. Like, what is this? He's like, yeah, they're going to buy something like in 2 years. Okay, well, that's not revenue, right? And so that drops your SDE 200K or 300K. And so that's a dead deal. Sometimes there's massive deferred revenue where, like, we did one where it was like a company that did subscriptions, 3 years, 2 years, and the seller wanted to keep all that money. He's like, yeah, I signed someone up for 3 year subscription. I'm taking all that money. Well, no, like that's not how it works, right? Like, you've got to leave some for us to satisfy these customers, and they weren't willing to, and that's a dead deal. In getting away from the actual financial due diligence, there's been some where rollover equity they couldn't agree on, seller note terms, standby or not. We had one where the seller like went all the way to the end. We did everything, and he just got cold feet. Like 2 days before close, just ghosted my buyer and said that was it. And I felt bad for the buyer because he spent so much time, money, legal, financial, but the seller just couldn't come. I think when they hit a bit more of a reality, like, man, this business is leaving me forever, and that's all they've known for 25, 30 years, especially when you're dealing with like Midwestern blue collar guys who built this something from scratch. They're very prideful of their business. And I think when they hit that, hey, I'm selling it today, you got cold feet. So we've seen, I guess, the gauntlet here. But I love to say the SMB world it's a bit like the Wild West. You don't know what you're going to get. So it's an interesting year.
What about from the buy side? Like, what I understand some buyers really, like you alluded to it a little bit, they put in a lot of money and time and try to become the preferred buyer for a certain transaction. Could you describe what that looks like from the seller side? Like, what's something that buyers are doing right or wrong?
Yeah, I think from the seller side, what buyers can be doing better, and I think I've dealt with some buyers and where I think they've been a little bit poor with the way they communicate. And I think, especially when you're dealing with M&A, you're dealing with people, and you're dealing with sellers, communication is like the utmost important thing you're going to be doing in this transaction, regardless of the technical things. Every party needs to feel like they're involved in the process, or they know what's going on, or you're honest and truthful with them. We dealt with the deal where, the buyers couldn't get financing, but they weren't really sharing that with the seller. Seller was growing frustrated, right? Because he was saying like, we're doing the DD on the quality of earnings, that he's like, listen, have you guys spoken with the buyer? I keep messaging him, asking him, where if they got a commitment letter or where they're at with the financing. They're not getting back to me, and just like not getting back to the seller, and kind of pushing them on, not being honest with them. I'd say that doesn't happen often, but that was like one of the cases where I'm like, yeah, the buyer could have done that a little bit better. Another one is buyers kind of asking about, obviously they want to ask about everything, but when they come across as combative, I think that causes a little bit of an issue. And we dealt with the deal earlier this year, and they were doing cash bases, and we kind of switched them to accrual, and that drops their EBITDA 300-400K. The buyer says to the seller on call, and I think this was maybe a language thing or communication. They said, "Oh, you've we frauded us, or you guys misstated the financials by 300K." And I was on that chain. I was like, guys, listen, they didn't misstate it. They told us it was cash. They said it was probably going to be different. We knew that. That's why we did this exercise to accrual. But I think the seller really took that to heart, because on the next call, they were like, listen, guys, because we were reaching LOI exclusivity, and the buyer wanted to extend the LOI to another 10, 15 days. And the seller was pretty upset at that comment. They're like, listen, we take pride in what we do. And for you to say that we're intentionally misrepresenting the financials, that's a big accusation, right? So I think buyers like, just don't say those kind of things. If we have a conversation with the internal team, we need to frame it in a better way for the seller. Like, we don't want to push their buttons and say, you guys are misrepresenting, or you guys gave us this and it's clearly wrong. There's times where I call a buyer and I say that. I tell the buyer, like, listen, this is clearly wrong. It's fine. Like, just know this going into it. We'll fix it. Or let's ask the seller a little bit more detail, and we try to go around and in a roundabout process to make it happen. What buyers do well, the ones that I've seen succeed and close, is build a relationship with the seller, but always be weary of trust but verify. So you want to build a relationship. Like, I've got a lot of my buyers, like we're dealing with one, they've taken the seller and his wife out to dinner multiple times. They have a communication path directly to each other that's not involving the broker, not involving myself, not involving legal. And sometimes that's the best case, because when you get 10 different parties all with their opinions, it kind of convolutes what you and the buyer, or you and the seller, are trying to achieve. And when they're staying on post close, that relationship is ultimately up to you guys. And you as a buyer, like, a lot of the times your business hinges on the seller's relationships. Like, post close, if the seller doesn't like you or goes cold turkey for a lot of these SMB deals under 10, 15 million, that's going to suck for you, because guess what? Those subcontractors, they're probably the seller's friends, because he's been doing business with them for 20 years, right? Those clients that you've got, they know the seller's number by heart, because they're somebody that they've trusted for years and years. And so you want to build that relationship with the seller so that you guys can bypass all the noise at times and say, listen, man, like, is this really important? Are we okay with skipping this? Or how do we get our teams on board? And sometimes, they'll talk amongst each other. And we did a deal earlier this year. We had an old seller, and they couldn't really give me an inventory report. And I went to the buyer. I said, hey, what do you want to do? Like, I can't really verify their inventory. They don't got an aging report. They're not recording it correctly. He's like, man, I'm just going to fly down there. And he was in the same industry, so he had quite a bit of experience. And so he flew down there and he met with the seller. They went through it. He's like, yeah, I think it's okay. Like, he's shown me his listings. We've gone through them. I've sat with him. And so it's getting that, so they kind of bypassed me, but they did it with each other, right? And so as long as their relationship's good and they're able to solve that problem, I think that goes a long way in all of the issues that come up, whether it's financial, legal, how you guys want to structure the deal. All of that can be dealt with when it's two people kind of, can bypass each other and they have a strong relationship.
You mentioned that dealing with lower mid-market deals requires more people skills, whereas mid-market is a little bit more technical. Could you unpack that a little bit?
Of course, yeah. So I'll give you an example. So a mid-market one we did last year, probably 55 million US. The buyer engaged us, and we were only the QV provider. Like, they have advisors for everything. They've got their internal CFO. They've got a VP of finance themselves as part of their company. And so they are saying, here, just focus on the QV. We'll do everything else, right? They've got teams to do everything. And on the QV, we're looking at technical accounting things because they matter, like accrued revenue, or like deferred revenue, accrued liabilities, warranty liabilities. Like, in the SMB world, are you able to get warranty liability stats? Probably not. But for the company that they were buying 55 million, they were a little bit bigger. So they had these numbers they could give us. So we were able to dive a little bit deeper and provide technical accounting. We did technical accounting memos. We did a memo on warranty liability and how it's, I think there were IFRS and IAS too, how it kind of ties into the financial statements. We looked at presentation of financial statements, right? Like financial statement notes we looked at. Like things that you probably can bypass in the SMB world, because SMB, you're caring about cash flow. That's it. You're not caring about, are the notes of the financials correct, or the financials presentations correct? And we looked at a lot of like right of use assets, lease liabilities, things like that. And, we did the calculations, and, so that's more on the technical accounting side. On the SMB world, my biggest priority is, can this business sustain the debt you are putting on it? Because you as a buyer are not the same as a seller. The seller doesn't have to have crazy financial statements because, well, guess what? They don't have any debt on the business. They have 2 million EBITDA and they don't have any debt. So if they have a month that's slow, or they don't do their accounting right, or they're not on top of their cash flow, they're still making money. But you as a buyer that's got a 50K debt payment that's coming out every first of the month, well, you've got to make sure you got cash to pay that. And so my biggest worry comes from cash flow. And we still, obviously technical accounting is still important. We still look at things, but it's a lot more focused on cash flow and sustaining cash. Like, what's the, for heavy capex business, what's the replacement capex, what's the growth capex? We need somebody, we need to look at the valuations. Whereas like a mid-market deal, they might have an equipment appraiser going there checking all the equipment. SMB might not have one. And so we're very concerned about, okay, is the equipment right? What's the growth capex needed? How do we sustain this? Same with inventory. Mid market might do a few counts, have somebody on site to go check it. SMB probably is you checking it as the buyer, or us going through their inventory aging. And like I said, we're concerned about cash flow, and that's our main priority. Is you're buying a business with this much debt. Can you service it? Can you grow it? And can you reach your ultimate goal of buying a profitable and cash flow business? And so that we work backwards from that. Like, we start there and say, okay, how do we achieve this goal? We do the QV, we do financial due diligence, we focus on working cap, we focus on capex if the business heavy capex, we focus on we've done, I mentioned warranty liability. We did that recently on one where they offer 3-year warranties on their construction projects. And it's like, okay, well, we got to make sure that we've got something in escrow to take care of this. Construction projects, like, what's the work in progress? Do we have upcoming projects that can sustain our EBITDA? Like, historic EBITDA is cool, but we're worried about future EBITDA, especially for construction, right? Like, do we have these big projects coming in? Are any of our developers at risk of going under? Like, let's Google these developers. Like, what else are they building? Like, what's their debt profile? Are we able to find that online? Are we able to speak to external people in the building community who kind of know these guys and see what they're up to? So that's where we come from in the SMB world. It's a lot more like chasing a goal and working backwards. Whereas, yeah, in the mid market, you're like, for us, we're qualitatively not going to assess like all of our clients. Well, they've got somebody to do that on their team, right? They've already gone through, they've got a fancy LBO model they put together. They know their cash flow. They just want to verify the old historic numbers. Like, and so it's coming from a different perspective. And I think different level of knowledge on M&A transactions and seeing, and so we kind of adapt our process accordingly. And I always tell buyers, like, you can be as much or as little involved in the process as you like. If you want to be on every CC with me and every call, like, I love that for you. If you've got other things to do and this isn't your first rodeo and you kind of know and you want to focus on commercial and operational DD, it's up to you. And so, yeah, I think for us, it's just our perspective changes.
When you have two sides and you've got everything documented and you're looking at the paperwork and there's still disagreements, like, where do those disagreements come? Like you mentioned, when you switch to accrual, you're very transparent about it, yet there was still a misunderstanding and perhaps some inappropriate language. But I understand that happens a lot. So where in your experience is this coming from when you're both looking at the same thing essentially, but seeing something different?
Yeah, of course. I think it's from a base, where you're starting from as a baseline causes a lot of issues, right? I mentioned this earlier when we were talking. It's like we're doing one where the seller has a working cap number in mind, and the buyer does. And the seller's number was calculated incorrectly to start with, but that number is now embedded in their mind, right? So if we stray, like we've strayed like almost 2.5x away from that number, and so that's going to be a hard sell because now the seller's thinking, well, I went through this process thinking it was this number, and they just received poor information to start. So although they've got a working cap calc, we've got one. We're explaining to them why ours is correct and they've done theirs incorrectly. And I'm sure their accountant's going to eventually agree. The seller to bridge that gap is a huge ask, right? Because that's $2.5 million. And then they didn't think they were going to have to leave that in the business. And so it's starting from a baseline of incorrect and trying to, and then both parties are kind of sometimes like, especially like older sellers who've been there, they're stuck on their ways a little bit. And so when they hear a number and they see something at first, they think that's it. And so for them to try to bridge the gap, they don't understand it. Like sometimes sellers don't even understand what working capital is. And I say, listen, like this is why you leave it in the business. What's this for? And he's like, I don't get it. Our people pay quickly. Like we did a deal recently where we're like, okay, seller, we did a huge working cap calc, like came out to like 400K, and the seller said, oh, I think it's 200. And we're like, okay, that's fine. Like, where did you get the 200 from? He's like, oh, I just think it is 200. And it's like there's no number for him. He just thinks that because he's been running the business. He's like, oh, I think it's 200. Well, okay. And so trying to bridge that gap, even though we've got something on paper, it's a little bit difficult because he says, I don't know, like he sees the calc and everything, and he's just like, oh, I think it's 200 still. And it's like, okay, well, at that point, it's a little bit difficult, right? Because
Yeah,
you're
it's subjective. It's like they're, like you said, that for some of these people, it's like a family member, the company. They've been a part of it for so long. So it's probably hard to see it objectively.
100%, right? And they think like they're like, well, they're coming in. You guys have been here for a month. I've been here for 25 years. I know it. I don't think you guys do. And I always encourage sellers, okay, like I'm not saying you're wrong, but can you provide something that I can say as a third party? Okay, I agree with that. And sometimes they try to, and they come back eventually and say, okay, I think you're right. And sometimes they go to their CPA, and their CPA is like, yeah, okay, I think you're right. And I think it helps when their own advisor explains it to them. And so I always say to people, like, let me call the seller CPA and talk to them a little bit CPA to CPA, so I can walk them through the logic, and they'll say, okay, that makes sense. They'll call the seller comes back, okay, you guys are right. It's just if I say it to them or the buyer, the seller thinks that they might be getting a little bit stiff armed or swindled. And so I think coming from their own advisors, that always helps these disagreements. Like if I can get their CPA on board with something I'm saying, I know I've won, not really won the battle, but I've done the most I can possibly do. If they still disagree with their own CPA, then okay, we're just we've got to do something else. But I think usually that works.
You mentioned that in the M&A space, trust is very important. How can you go about, either buy side or sell side, how can you go about instilling that trust?
Yeah, I think it's obviously a little bit difficult to say with like 100% certainty because everyone, if they and I always tell buyers this too, if like a seller intentionally wants to fraud you and they've got other people on board, there's like not very little, but there's a good chance DD is going to miss it, especially if there's collusion and there's like 7 or 8 people on. I've never seen this happen, but it's just that's why I go back to the trust thing at the start, right? It's being honest with communication, open. The best sellers are the ones that and I know not every seller can do this, but they give us access to their QuickBooks and they say anything you guys want. Here's the bank statements. Here's QuickBooks. Here's my credit cards. Here's my invoices. Here's my customer contracts. Here's my work in progress. Have fun. Like they give us everything up front, and they give access to their staff. Now I know a lot of businesses, like the most difficult deals, and I are the ones where the staff doesn't know and the seller's gotta try to give me like QuickBooks data that he doesn't even know, and then we're just like dealing with things that are, and then I'll say, can you build this? He's like, oh well, I can't because my accounting manager doesn't know about this transaction. Well, and that's a little bit difficult, right? Those are the most difficult ones. The ones that I think I've got the most confidence in, and where trust comes in, is just giving access to your staff, giving access to all the information. Obviously, I know that can't be the case every time. I'm saying in a perfect world from a buyer's QV perspective, that's what I love to have. And then from the buyer's perspective, just telling them, keeping the seller in loop in all the processes, what we're doing, why we're doing it, massaging information, not just I mentioned earlier saying that you're committing fraud or that you tried to swing this or something. It's just communicating appropriately and making sure that the seller feels like, okay, your business is going to be in good hands, that we're going to do a good job, that we're just vetting it and we're going through the process right now. And I think those go a long way, and that helps to build trust. And the best deals are the ones where the buyer and seller post close work side by side, and they're still able to kind of operate the business together. Because I've heard of stories, I haven't seen it yet, where the seller and buyer have a blow up post close, and it's never fun. That's when lawyers get involved. That's where legal gets involved, and that's when things get contentious. And when you're dealing with relationship based businesses under 10 million, a lot of the time, especially construction ones, it's seller relationships matter. His relationship with the employees matter. They, as a new guy, they don't have any relationship with you, so you've got to go in there and try to build that, whereas a seller has that. And so getting the seller to say that this is the new owner, and he's I love him, I work with him, and I'm excited for him to take the business, that goes a long way. And those qualitative things really matter in the deal.
You mentioned that there can be a challenge with large banks not recognizing you as much as like a pre-vetted firm. Could you describe a little bit about what that's like and what you can do to kind of break into that trust cycle?
Yeah, of course. And so it's funny because we're sitting up here in Vancouver. I've had this issue more with Canadian quality of earnings and Canadian companies than I've had with American ones, which is fascinating to me because we're a Canadian firm and we've got 60 people and we're CPA BC pre-approved. But a lot of times when you're dealing with banks that are financing, they just want a rubber stamp. And for them, that rubber stamp says Deloitte, KPMG, PwC. That's it. There's times where a buyer says, hey, I want to engage Treewalk to do QV, and the bank says, I only take QVs from KPMG. In that situation, there honestly isn't much we can do if the bank's got their mind made up. I think for us, it's always been, let's try to build relationships with as many banks as we can, do high quality work, be able to send them sample reports and say, we've done this. Here's a report. Here's a data book. This is what it's going to look like. And ultimately, it's they've got relationships with the firms, and coming from a firm, I know that. I'm sure the firm sends them a lot of financing, and they send the firm a lot of quality of earnings works, right? And it's fortunately how it works. So from our perspective, it's always been just, let's try to maintain the relationships as best as we can. Let's get our name out there. Let's do as many QVs as we can, help as many buyers, get a strong word of mouth. M&A is all referral based. It's all word of mouth. Like, you trust an advisor, somebody else is trusted, that's closed a deal, and things are going well for them. That gives you confidence in trusting an advisor. And so on the Canadian side, especially, I've seen it more. On the American side, I haven't seen it as much, surprisingly. I don't know if the financing there is maybe a little bit easier to get, and they're a little bit lenient on who the QV is. Maybe they just want a good firm. Like, if you send their background, they say, okay, all good, check the box. Whereas, yeah, Canadian banks, especially big banks like the big five banks, they tend to be a little bit more strict with who's doing the QV. I've seen, like, there was a $2.5 million deal, and the bank wanted KPMG to do it. Well, that's like 85 grand on a $2.5 million deal just on quality of earnings. And so I felt bad for the buyer because I didn't think they needed it in that situation, but the bank required it. And unfortunately, the buyer needed the bank's financing. And so you're left with the situation where they have to go with the bank's choice of quality of earnings provider. And so, it sucks for us losing out on deals, especially when the buyer likes us, wants to work with us, and we have a relationship with them, but it's a third party saying, no, you can't use them because, we want to go with the big four. In that case, there's not much we can do. We just have to abide by the bank's decision. I try my best to get on a phone with the bank at all times and say, listen, what do you need? I can send you 10 samples. I can send you my bio or CEO's bio or senior manager's bios. Like, what is it that you need? And a lot of times they've got their mind made up, I think. So it's a little difficult. But, I think eventually as we continue to grow this and word of mouth spreads and people see the success that we're doing in all of our deals, hopefully end up being successful post close, that it creates a little bit more, credence to our work here.
Looking at your website, Treewalk, it says, by embracing new approaches and AI technology, we're an accounting firm that's helping businesses redefine their accounting process and invest in value alone. Could you talk at all about how you're working with AI technology?
Of course, yeah. So The interesting thing about Treewalk, we've got a few different divisions at our firm. So I'm obviously head of the M&A side. We've got the financial reporting, bookkeeping, fractional CFO, controllership. So I think our bookkeeping team, especially, has been using trying to use AI to make their processes more efficient and streamline things. Now, on a day-to-day basis, I'm not as involved in that side of the business because I'm doing QVs, but they've done, I think, a heavy amount of investment in streamlining processes and trying to make people's bookkeeping more efficient. And I think when you think of accounting as a whole, bookkeeping is probably the part of it that's most prime to benefit from AI and benefit from having some sort of tech enabled system to allow you to get your journal entries in faster, to allow you to, have your transactions automated. And I think that's the space where we've been kind of, and I think we're hiring somebody actually right now. And I don't know if Alex has hired someone to lead our, I think, I can't remember the exact roles title now. I think it's AI solutions manager or something, where we're going to hire one person, a CPA, whose entire role is going to be finding AI solutions to our accounting problems. It's like, here's what we do on a basis. Go find us something to make this more efficient, faster, and better. Find a way we can use AI for our businesses and our clients. And so right now, I think we're in the cusp of that, early stages of finding things that work. I know our bookkeeping team has started to implement some things, but right now, I think it's like for us, full business investment is going towards trying to be the most efficient. And bookkeeping is one of those areas where a lot of firms do it. A lot of firms do it poorly. Some do it well. Everyone needs it. And so I think that's one area where we've been early stages of implementing AI in some of our processes here.
And speaking of that, in your experience, what could make the M&A process more efficient?
So I think the M&A process for SMB world is a little bit tough for at this stage, I think. And I think in the next 10, 15 years, it'll change. But the reason is half the things we're dealing with are a lack of information or a lack of information in the format that we like. Because we're like, I was mentioning this a few times, we're dealing with old sellers, guys who, have not really invested into their systems that much. They've just run a business and have become incredibly successful at it. They're very good at what they do. And are they the best at accounting or keeping track of records? Probably not. And so and I've seen, it's funny, I saw a post on Search Funder probably 2 months ago where people are trying a AI quality of earnings or something where it's like, hey, we could give you a QV in 2 days if you like. That's impossible, right? Like at this stage, that is impossible. And if someone is doing it as a buyer, I would say please be wary of that. And it may be a proof of cash you can try to automate because it's just deposits and expenses at the end of the day. But the problem becomes like when you're dealing with 10, 15 different bank accounts and you've got intercompany transfers and you've got to go through the bank account to identify those, it becomes difficult. But if you've got like one company with one bank account, yeah, you could probably use AI to do some sort of proof of cash for you at a high level. I think right now in the SMB world, like there's been, we've, having data rooms, having brokers streamline processes a little bit. But at the same time, it's just so hard because it's the sellers. As a professional service guy, like I said, we've done 27. I see this. I'm doing QVs every day. A buyer's only buying a business a lot of times once. Sometimes you got multiple buyers, but a lot of times it's the first time. And a seller, it's their first time. It's their first and only, buyer's first and only. And so for them, as much as you want to streamline and make things more efficient, they want to do their proper vetting. They want to go through the whole grinder of the process because they want to make sure they're buying the right business and the seller wants to make sure they're selling their business at the right value. And so as much as we would love to things to be quick and efficient and move, that they want to obviously do their thorough process. And obviously if they're putting a personal guarantee through SBA, they've got the right and probably they should be doing that. And so it is a little bit chunky in the lower mid market, I'd say, to try to streamline processes. I mean, even when I send a big DD request list that's streamlined or by priority, I've got one that's got like, okay, here's priority. It's like 60 requests, priority, what we need today, format we need it in. A lot of times sellers don't even read it. They'll just come back and say, hey, can you like call me? What do you need me to send? I'm like, oh man, I just sent you like a 60 request list. And then I've got to like tell them over the phone, hey, can you just send me this, and this first? And so as much as you try to do that, it doesn't work all the time.
You mentioned that you want to change the role of the service provider in the deal process, mentioning how sometimes accounting can have a bit of a bad reputation. How do you want to change that role? And why is it, do you think, that accounting has a bit of a bad reputation?
Yeah, I think that. So to answer your question, the first part, when people think of QV, I don't like when people use the term, oh, I've ordered a QV, or it makes it seem like it's something you check out in a box and you put it in your cart and say, deliver this to me in 3 weeks. That's not what I want to do. And that's not what we want to be. And we only don't want to be QV. I know QV and financial due diligence a lot of time are synonymous with each other. But for us, it's like when you hire us, I want it to be 3 or 4 weeks where it's like we're working together and we're a partner with you in this deal. And every client, I tell you, like sometimes we finish the QV and they still call me about random things about the deal and how to proceed. So that's what we want to be, and that's what we're trying to change. We don't want to be, here's your QV, um, do one presentation and say, okay, go to legal now and we'll talk to you when the deal closes. That does happen sometimes. Buyers, that know what they're doing, have done it a few times, they sometimes just want the QV. But we really want to change our role as a full financial due diligence as well as a full like financial advisor for you, right? Whether that's commenting on your deal structure, whether that's helping renegotiations on working cap, whether that's truing up any EBITDA or SDE that's if the deal's delayed a little bit, truing that up and figuring out what the new numbers are. And I think that's where we found success, and I think that's what our buyers appreciate, is that we don't want to put you in the system and say, okay, we're just working on this person's deal and we're gonna call them in 3 weeks. Like I want to be like interactive with you, sending you like, hey, here's what I'm seeing in the business 3 days in, 4 days in. Hey, keep an eye out for this. Like 5 days. Like this is, I want it to be a back and forth process where we work together to help you close this deal. And so that's where I think, like I said, I think that's where our clients appreciate, and that's where we found success, is not worrying about, oh, like I've spent this many hours on the deal, I'm over budget, like not worrying about that. And I tell all of our staff and any senior associate who works on the deal, like I don't care how long you spend on it. If I agree to a price with the buyer, I do that assuming the information I have. And, if it takes you longer, I'd rather you do a good job than worry about budget. Like, don't even worry about budget. Do the best possible job you can. And the finances and budgets and stuff, they figure themselves out eventually, because we do a really good job on that deal. Hey, we go over budget, but guess what? They might refer us to 3 more people. And so it's a word of mouth business, right? So we want to do the best job we possibly can and be a part of that process. Why accounting gets a bad rep, I think, and I've dealt with this so many times as a buy side QV provider, is like communication, right? Sometimes I message the accountant and they don't get back to me for like 5 days, and it's cryptic responses. They're slow and they're like not, are they, those, they're just not excited, I think, about the deal process, and they're not, and maybe they're their tax accountant or financial accountant, so they're not, but they're just, they're charging low rates, but they also give you low priority as a client. And I think a lot of clients have complained about their accountants not being great. And I've dealt with that so many times on the buy side. Is like, I'm trying to get information from the seller CPA, and it's like, who put this together? It's not great. It's poor quality. They didn't put time and effort into it. They're not explaining to their client why it's important. They're just giving them numbers. They're not showing them what they've done and how they've done it. And I think that's what we're trying to change, right? I want all of our buyers to have a direct communication line with me. They can call me, text me, and email, like walk me through this graph that you've done on the QV that says SDEs might be 200K lower, or show us how you've done it. And we want to work with them to do that. And so that's what we're trying to change. And that doesn't go just from my service line here at Treewalk. I think that's something Alex has said as a whole at the firm is what we've tried to do, right? Whether it's our fractional CFO work, whether it's fractional controllership work, it's trying to be the highest level of CPA that we can be, and really being a partner with the business, not just a, hey, like quarterly send me a report or like do my year end stuff. It's really being that person that they can rely on an ongoing basis. And you know what, we found some success doing that, and so I'm hoping it's going to continue that way, and I think people do appreciate that.
And what are you seeing in terms of deals? It seems like there's more and more as people become aware of the opportunities in the small and medium sized business, as well as the changing in the economy and generations. Do you see any other trends that are noteworthy?
Yeah, of course, and I think it's I don't know if you saw that Wall Street Journal article. It says the new millionaire class, and it's a guy wearing a hard hat and a blue collar jumpsuit. You know, it's a pretty popular article. It's going around the SMB space, and really, it's to say that I think people are recognizing that these businesses make a lot of money, and there's a lot of growth opportunities, and there's a lot of excitement involved. Obviously, there's risk involved in it, but you've got graduates. We work with search funds who've got guys from Wharton, Harvard, people who've done consulting at Bain, BCG, McKinsey, and they're buying these businesses in rural Indiana that's storm sewer cleaning or something, right? Like they've got to go in there and put their hard hat on and really get to work. And I think it's a fulfilling career, and people are starting to realize that. Like, listen, I can make way more money doing this. I can grow this business. I can implement what I've learned in school. Obviously, I don't think it's for everybody. You've got to be a certain type of personality to run these businesses, and it's not easy. It's hard. You got to deal with people. You got to deal with cash flow. You got to deal with working hours, and so I think in terms of why it's become so popular is because people are starting to recognize the returns you can get on these businesses and finding it way more fulfilling than kind of working at a cubicle, in Manhattan or something at Goldman Sachs post MBA. Next week or in 2 weeks, we're actually myself and our senior, we're going to the Chicago Booth ETA conference, and I'm actually excited for the first time to go to one of these and actually see what they talk about and meet um, perspective. Like I usually meet people like LOI stage, sometimes a little bit early, but really meet people who are fresh out of MBA who are trying to learn about ETA and trying to see like why they're coming here and what their attraction to the space was. So I'm excited to go to that conference and hopefully meet a ton of people. But I think in America it's very robust. They've got like SBA, they've got so many people involved. And I know you had, I think it was Karen Spencer on a few weeks ago, and she's one of the people that's very popular in the space, and so there's a lot of people in the American space that are vouching. In Canada, I know like we got Mario out at Stikeman in Toronto, he's big, and Sage Capital Partners. I met they're doing a few good things as well, and so I think it's in the early cusp here in Canada. I don't maybe it stays that way because our financing is a little bit more tight. Maybe I don't know how it might change. I don't know. I hope it does. But I think people are starting to understand, like, man, you can make so much money in these businesses and pay down your debts and, become an owner, become a CEO. But, I caveat that all by saying it does require a certain personality. It's never easy. It's a lot of stress. It's a lot of difficult times, I think. Um, I was listening to an Acquiring Minds podcast where a gentleman, I forgot his name, I don't know if you saw it, he talked about how his business went bankrupt and he personally guaranteed it. And it was a business that he had bought, and he walked us through that. And so there are stories like that people need to. And I think his story was seller kind of defrauding him a little bit, not being honest with him and lying about a few things. But I mean that does happen. Happens less than the success stories, but it's obviously something that people need to think about as they go to buy a business. Is the rewards are high, the risk is there, but man, is it awesome to see somebody buy a business, grow it, and sell it, and just kind of sail off into the sunset and do new things. So it's kind of on the cusp, I think, right now.
Well, yeah, I hope you have a great time at the Booth ETA conference. I haven't been to that one yet. I'd like to go someday. I went to the Harvard one, and it exceeded my expectations.
Did you go just recently? I think it was
I
last
went
week.
last year.
Oh, last year. Okay.
And there was a good crowd going from there to the because it's like a whole circuit.
Right.
MIT Sloan has one, Harvard has one. I think the MIT one's a different time of year, but the Chicago Booth one was just after the ETA conference in Harvard. So yeah, great time, great networking opportunities, and a lot of good learning too. Looking at case studies.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to go. It's our first one. We've been to like a lot of the Vancouver like ACG and things like that, but this is my first like ETA conference, and I think I got to the point where it's like most of our clients are kind of this ETA kind of space, anyways. So I wanted to go out there, meet a few of them, and really just see what they present on, and kind of hear some stories and things like that. So yeah, our team's excited to go. Hopefully, it'll be a good time.
Definitely. Well, yeah, thanks for talking with us today. You shed a lot of light on the sell side in particular, and just the M&A deals and processes that folks are either somewhat aware of or different levels of awareness. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to highlight?
No, I think we got through most of it, David. I really think, if I could give one parting advice to buyers is, man, like make sure you've got people in your corner. Make sure you got a good team. Don't skip out on any steps as much as you might think that you're able to or capable. Like I've got some clients that are CPAs and they still get a QV because they say, listen, I've got my blinders on. I've been in this thing 3, 4 weeks, heads down. Like I want someone else in it. And you know what? It sucks paying it up front, maybe, but man, if it saves you possible bankruptcy or something later down the line, it's so worth it. Um, just have people that have been in the space, been in the M&A space, know what they're doing, and always trust, but verify the information you're getting, and kind of understand that it's a roller coaster of a ride, and it never stops. Like from LOI to like that's just step one. It never gets any easier. There's going to be learnings on the way. Reach out to people who have done it, who have succeeded post close. Some of our clients, they do like blogs or newsletters, like things I've learned post close. Read some of those. I mean, those are so helpful. Even for me, like I talked to some of them and they've got, man, post close, what went well, what didn't go well, what I would have changed. And those are awesome to hear from people that have actually done it. So, yeah, that I think though that's my parting advice here.
And yeah, it was a great chatting with you, and thanks for coming on.
All right, appreciate the time, David. Enjoy the rest of your day.